WLAE-TV 32 presents Pope John Paul II in New Orleans.
Good evening, I'm Charles Ziwi, and welcome to our program. Tonight, we'll take a look at an unprecedented event in the history of New Orleans, the visit to our city by the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, Pope John Paul II. This was the Pope's second trip to the United States since his election in 1978. The first was in 1979. Once, traveling beyond the confines of Vatican City was considered unthinkable for the Holy Father, but modern papal travel has become a reality with this Pope. In the 9 years since he's taken office, he's traveled to more than 60 countries, touching down on every continent except Antarctica. During this 10-day tour of the U.S., the Pope will have traveled to 9 cities: Miami, Columbia, South Carolina, San Antonio, Phoenix, Los Angeles, Monterey, San Francisco, and Detroit. The Crescent City was his third stopover, and the welcome was typically New Orleans. The TWA jet carrying the Holy Father and his party arrived at New Orleans International Airport in the late evening on Friday, September the 11th, 1987. As John Paul emerged from the doorway, Deja's Olympia Brass Band serenaded His Holiness with a tune long associated with New Orleans. As invited guests looked on, the Pope was greeted by officials and dignitaries headed by Governor Edwin Edwards and Mayor Sidney Bartholomew. After almost a year of preparation, the wait was finally over. At the Pope's side, Archbishop Philip Hannon, serving as host and guide, but also as a friend. They've known each other for some 25 years. John Paul was then whisked away by limousine to the Notre Dame Seminary on Carrollton Avenue, where enthusiastic crowds had gathered. Security was tight as the Pope arrived at the residence of the Archbishop. Aside from his position in the church, the Pope also represents the Vatican as head of state. The Pope was accompanied by a large entourage, including Vatican personnel, secretaries, his valet, and physician, along with 2 Swiss guards. Breaking from the security plan, John Paul walked over to greet the crowd, shaking hands and kissing babies. After a light meal, the Pope retired for the evening. Although the Pope spent 2 nights in New Orleans, all of his public appearances were confined to Saturday, with back-to-back activities beginning with a liturgical welcome at the St. Louis Cathedral for area clergy, religious, and city fathers, followed by a motorcade to the Louisiana Superdome. There, addresses to Black Catholics and Catholic educators. Later, a giant youth rally. In the afternoon, a large outdoor mass at UNO, concluding with another speech to university educators at Xavier University. All of this in the course of a day. For the 67-year-old pontiff who enjoys swimming, skiing, and backpacking, fitness is an occupational necessity. Saturday morning, crowds gathered at the St. Louis Cathedral to greet the Pope on his first stop of the day, a liturgical welcome for area clergy and religious. With its French and Spanish heritage, Louisiana is rooted in Catholicism. Today, in the Archdiocese of New Orleans, Catholics comprise more than 37% of the total population. 500 priests, 1,200 nuns, and hundreds of other religious personnel serve 144 parish churches. Many of these clergy and religious women gathered here to hear the message of the Holy Father. The theme of the Pope's U.S. visit, unity in the work of service. Shortly after 8 a.m., the papal motorcade arrived. As he stepped from his limousine, 2,500 clergy and religious who could not squeeze into the cathedral greeted him. Not one to disappoint a crowd, the Pope pushed past his security and took the opportunity to embrace his flock. Jesuit High School's bell choir rang out announcing the entrance of the Holy Father. John Paul was greeted by Father Jared Barrett, the rector of the cathedral, who presented holy water to the Pope. As John Paul proceeded into the cathedral, he paused to greet those lucky enough to have an aisle seat. Moving on to the left altar, he paused in silent prayer before the Blessed Sacrament. Afterward, the Pope returned to the sanctuary where he was introduced by Archbishop Hannon.
Your Holiness, it is with inexpressible pleasure that I welcome you to this venerable cathedral in the name of all the priests and religious gathered here. This is the day the Lord has made. In Louisiana, Your Holiness, as I have told you, we have parishes, not counties, as subdivisions of the state. So today, this state is your parish.
1,000 religious from Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and parts of Florida listened as the Pope delivered a message on service to Christ and his church.
From this Cathedral of St. Louis, I am happy to greet, in the name of the Most Holy Trinity, the whole church in New Orleans, all those who make up her membership, all those who work together to fulfill her mission. As this Cathedral of St. Louis is the focal point of the city of New Orleans, so too Christ is the very center of your lives. Christ is for you the beginning and the end. He is for you the way and the truth and the life. Dear brothers and sisters, your life of service, dedicated to Christ and his church, bears witness to the reality of God's love for his people. You joyfully proclaim the good news of faith, that God is love.
At the conclusion of the service, all stood and joined the Pope in song. In a rare occurrence, many of the nuns from cloistered orders ventured here to see the pontiff. All along the line, they kissed John Paul's ring and clutched his hand, not letting go until the tips of his fingers slipped past their grip. In commemoration of this historic visit, the city of New Orleans renamed this portion of Chartres Street Place de John Paul II, an apt postscript for the cathedral which first opened its doors on this site on Christmas Eve, 1795. Following the cathedral service, there was a motorcade which allowed the general public its first look at the Holy Father since his arrival. People came early to find a place, pressing against the barricades that lined the route. Even for New Orleanians, accustomed to Mardi Gras-sized parades and crowds, this was something extraordinary. The route took the Pope down Decatur Street, skirting the French Quarter, before turning onto Canal. Nowhere was the appeal of this Pope more evident. A throng of people waving, shouting, their cameras poised, all for a glimpse and perhaps a blessing for the man some have called the most widely loved pontiff in history. John Paul traveled in a specially designed Jeep-like vehicle with a plexiglass dome. The Pope-mobile not only provided the public with an unobstructed view of the Pope, but in return allowed the Pope a clear view of the festive banners and decorations that adorned Canal Street. The motorcade wound its way along the downtown route to its final destination, the Louisiana Superdome, site of a huge youth rally later in the day. Prior to that, however, the Pope conducted meetings with special interest groups, the National Catholic Educational Association, and a delegation of black Catholics.
Walk him up, walk him up the stairs. Walk him up, walk him up, walk him up the stairs.
The Xavier University Choir set an inspirational tone for a most unique event, the first meeting in this country between a Pope and black Catholic leaders. 1,800 delegates nationwide attended the conference, which was hosted by the 11 black Catholic bishops of America. More than 300 local participants, including clergy, religious, and laymen, filled the Superdome meeting room for this historic event. Nationally, there are 1.3 million black Catholics, with more than 100,000 black Catholics in the Archdiocese of New Orleans. One reason New Orleans was chosen as the site for this event stemmed from the long tradition of black Catholicism in the area. As the Pope entered the room, he was greeted by Catholic bishops and an enthusiastic crowd.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, amen. Thank the Lord for the Holy Spirit, who revives my soul again. Hallelujah.
Later, the Pope listened as Bishop Joseph Howes of Biloxi spoke on the desires of black Catholics in America today.
Blacks desire to find salvation in Jesus Christ and his church by offering our giftedness to the church through our traditional art forms, spirituality, and rich customs. Black Catholics want to express our faith, reflecting our unique identity and experiences. Yet, at the same time, we want our expressions of faith to become ever more a part of the Christian Catholic tradition. Black Catholics love the church and want to become a more significant part of its mission to evangelize and sanctify the world. We wish to share our gifts with others who do not know Jesus and the church as we do.
Amid applause from the crowd, the Pope touched on issues close to the hearts of his audience.
I express my deep love and esteem for the black community in the United States. Its vitality is a sign of hope for society. Continue to inspire us by your desire to forgive as Jesus forgave. And by your desire to be reconciled with all the people of this nation, even those who would unjustly deny you the full exercise of your human rights. Even in this wealthy nation, committed by its founding fathers to the dignity and equality of all persons, the black community suffers a disproportionate share of economic deprivation. Far too many of your young people receive less than an equal opportunity for a quality education and for gainful employment. The Church must continue to join her efforts with the efforts of others who are working to correct all imbalances and disorders of a social nature. Indeed, the Church can never remain silent in the face of injustice wherever it is clearly present.
The Holy Father called for not only the acceptance of blacks in the Catholic Church today, but also invited them to share their unique gifts with the world.
Dear brothers and sisters, your black cultural heritage enriches the Church. And makes her witness of universality more complete. In a real way, the Church needs you. Just as you need the Church. For you are part of the Church, and the Church is part of you.
The Pope blessed the congregation, and the Xavier University Choir closed with a musical selection.
Hallelujah, 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 amen. Thank the Lord for the Holy Spirit, who revives my soul again. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
The Pope then made the brisk walk to the next meeting room, where nearly 2,000 Catholic educators waited to greet him. The conference, officially sponsored by the National Catholic Educational Association, was attended by educators from Catholic elementary and secondary schools. Catholic elementary education in the United States is rooted in the history of the country itself. As early as the 1600s, Spanish missionaries established schools alongside their missions in Florida. New Orleans boasts the first Catholic free school founded by the Ursuline nuns in 1727. Since those early days, Catholic schools, both parochial and private, have greatly contributed to the growth of education in America. Several speakers representing various parts of the United States addressed the Pope concerning the contributions of Catholic education to the Church, the nation, and the world.
It is our belief that the Church in the United States derives much of its strength from our schools and religious education programs spread across the face of this country.
It is clear that one of the most important things our teachers do is create and sustain an extraordinary sense of community in our schools and parish programs. From them flows the love that binds strangers into family.
There are almost 3 million children in Catholic schools and more than 4 million in parish programs. These are provided through the personal and financial sacrifices of thousands of parents, teachers, administrators, and other generous Catholics.
A videotape presentation outlined issues of special importance to those in attendance: the roles of religious, laity, and parents, the financial challenges, and the future of Catholic education in America.
Good morning, rise and shine. Hey kids, another school day. Let's not be late. You don't want to miss that pop quiz. You did study, didn't you?
I like to see children turn on to learning. That's what education is all about. To see that little face light up and an idea take off and a skill develop when they come into my class and not be able to write very well. By the time they graduate and they can write anything in the world, and it's fabulous.
Following the videotape, Pope John Paul addressed the gathering.
Teachers, community is at the heart of all Catholic education. Not simply as a concept to be taught, but as a reality to be lived. Help your students to see themselves as members of the universal church and the world community. Help them to understand the implications of justice and mercy. Foster in your students a social consciousness which will move them to meet the needs of their neighbors and to discern and seek to remove the sources of injustice in society. No human anxiety or sorrow should leave the disciples of Jesus Christ indifferent. This is my hope, this is my prayer, that you will be totally open to Christ, that He will give you an ever greater love for your students and an ever stronger commitment to your vocation as Catholic educators. If you continue to be faithful to this ministry today, as you have been in the past, you will be doing much in shaping a peaceful, just, and hope-filled world for the future. Yours is a great gift to the Church, a great gift to your nation.
But in the end, he put aside his prepared speech and spoke from the heart, proving that in a true dialogue, listening is as essential as speaking.
Of course, you are going to the school as teachers, but before being teacher, you were obliged to come to the schools, to go to the schools as students. And I myself have come here first as a student. As a student, I thank you for all you have taught me this morning. And of course, the students, they have also their anxieties. And they have also their anxieties. The anxiety of the students are still a note. So I am anxious what kind of note I shall receive for the great community of American teachers, all Catholic schools. But I am hoping. I am hopeful. Thank you very much.
As the meeting concluded, the crowd inside the Superdome arena wound up. With the exuberance usually reserved for a rock concert, thousands of young people aged 14 to 23, along with parents and chaperones, filled the dome for what was billed as a giant youth rally. The Pope-mobile finally made its entrance and circled the perimeter of the dome floor as Christian rock singer Tom Franzak sang "Build Up the Body," a theme song for the event.
We're gifted, all gifted, children of God, called forth to bring light to the world.
The Pope extended his arms in blessing, and young people as far away as the upper balconies of the dome waved back. The Pope has always had deep affection for young people, and his reception at the dome displayed his fantastic rapport with them.
I know we shall come together to build up the body and the kingdom of the Lord.
At the podium, Sally Davis, a 16-year-old junior at Mercy Academy, welcomed the Holy Father and spoke of the contributions of young people.
And there are many gifts that young people have to share. We can share our energy and vitality with the many less fortunate throughout the world. We want to be partners in the mission of the church. We want to be recognized as capable. Every year, thousands of volunteer hours are performed by high school students throughout the area. Multiplied across the United States, we become a vital force, performing various tasks, from cutting grass for an elderly parishioner, to assisting with feeding the hungry, from holding the hand of a hospital patient, to cheering a handicapped child across the finish line.
The Pope then delivered the first part of his address, which focused on finding the truth in Christ.
It is with the truth of Jesus, dear young people, that you must face the great questions in your lives, as well as the practical problems. The world will try to deceive you about many things that matter, about your faith, about pleasure, about material things, about the dangers of drugs. And at one stage or another, the false voices of the world will try to exploit your human weakness by telling you that life has no meaning at all for you. The supreme depth in your lives would be if they succeeded in robbing you of hope. They will try, but not succeed if you hold fast to Jesus and his truth.
Entertainment was an essential element in this youth rally, not only for the kids, but also for the pontiff, who once wanted to become an actor and still enjoys singing and playing his guitar. Irish singer Donna performed her song Totus Tuus, translated Totally Yours, which is the Pope's motto. Later, in what was billed as a taste of Mardi Gras, the Pope was entertained by a mini parade, complete with floats and marching bands. The theme of the program, as reflected in the floats, focused on the very things that young people have to offer the church and the world. Musical selections were also provided by an Hispanic choir. Later, students from area schools were given the honor of addressing the Holy Father, who listened attentively.
We need to work together, regardless of the color of anyone's skin, the nature of anyone's religious or political beliefs, anyone's gender, or the sound of anyone's name or language, or the nation in which anyone was born or lives.
Our generation can contribute new ideas and new ways of doing things. We can create a safer and more secure world. Since we are the future, the building of God's kingdom of justice and love is up to us. We are important today as young people, but also tomorrow as we become leaders and followers.
When the young people presented him with gifts to take home to the Vatican, the Pope seemed clearly delighted. The gifts: a wood carving, a painting, and befittingly, a Mardi Gras mask. A Vietnamese dance troupe rounded out the entertainment, representing yet another ethnic sector from New Orleans.
My dear young people, I express my sincere gratitude to all of you for this special meeting, for this rich program. During the program, you have interpreted what means totus tuus. And I understood once more that totus tuus means not only to be ready for giving, but also to be ready for receiving.
Shortly before 2 p.m., the Pope reluctantly departed. No doubt the centerpiece of the Pope's visit to New Orleans was the outdoor Mass celebrated at the campus of the University of New Orleans. Although the Mass was scheduled for 4 p.m., people began pouring through the gates as they opened at 8 that morning. Ironically, the hot, sunny weather everyone was concerned about gave way to a torrential downpour late in the afternoon. But most people came prepared to brave the elements. Attendance was less than expected, but the numbers were still staggering. 2,700 volunteers acting as ushers for an estimated 200,000 participants. 5,000 people acted in ministerial roles, and 325 others sang in the choir. Shortly after 3 o'clock, concelebrants began making their way from the UNO arena, some carrying umbrellas, others happily ignoring the downpour. Just prior to the Pope's arrival, the choir began singing "Gather Us from the Four Winds," a song composed for this occasion. From the various areas of the Mass site, all color-coded, came 14 brightly colored banners carried by students from Pope John Paul II High School in Slidell. They converged on the altar platform, providing a colorful backdrop for the Mass. Running a bit behind schedule, the Pope arrived at the lakefront site. It took the Pope only a few minutes to circle the grounds in the Pope-mobile, weaving through a sea of colorful umbrellas. For many in the outlying sections of the 60-acre site, this was their one chance to see the Holy Father up close and perhaps made the long, wet wait worthwhile. The Holy Father then left to vest for Mass. Gradually, the skies cleared, the umbrellas were lowered, and a shortened procession began. Climbing the steps of the altar platform, the Holy Father ceremoniously kissed the altar in veneration. As the Pope made the sign of the cross, the service began.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Peace be with you.
The Mass was the liturgy for Sunday, September 13th, the 24th Sunday in Ordinary Time as assigned from the Catholic calendar. Two prayers traditionally begin the Mass, the Lord have mercy and the Gloria. The cantor sang, "The Lord have mercy," a remnant of those first prayers of the early Greek Church. This penitential rite expresses the desire for salvation.
Lord Jesus, giver of new life, Christ have mercy. Christ have mercy.
The choir then sang the Gloria, beginning with the words the angels sang one night long ago in Bethlehem.
Glory to God.
Following this, the Pope prayed the opening prayer aloud.
Father in heaven, creator of all, look down upon your people in their moments of need. For you alone are the source of our peace.
The first portion of the Mass focused on the act of prayer. The next segment turned to the act of listening, with two readings taken from the book of Sirach and Paul's letter to the Romans.
Forgive your neighbors injustice. Then when you pray, your own sins will be forgiven.
None of us lives as his own master, and none of us dies as his own master. While we live, we are responsible to the Lord. And when we die as his servants.
Following that was the gospel. Up to this point, the congregation has heard the message from men, the apostles and disciples. Now, God himself speaks through the teachings of Christ in the gospel. This essential element of the liturgy was taken from the Gospel according to Matthew, in which Jesus relates a parable about forgiveness.
Peter came up and asked Jesus, "Lord, when my brother wrongs me, how often must I forgive him? 7 times?" "No," Jesus replied, "not 7 times. I say 70 times, 7 times."
The homily is an attempt to develop, amplify, and comment on the teachings in the gospel. The Pope on this day said forgiveness could solve many of the world's problems.
In the symbolic language of the Bible, this means that we must be able to forgive everyone, every time. Surely, this is one of the most difficult and radical commands of the gospel. Yet, how much suffering and anguish, how much futility, destruction, and violence would be avoided if only we put into practice in all our human relationships the Lord's answer to Peter. No relationship as intense and close as marriage and the family can survive without forgiveness 70 times, 7 times. If couples cannot forgive with the tenderness and sensitivity that mercy brings, then they will inevitably begin to see their relationship only in terms of justice, of what is mine and what is yours, emotionally, spiritually, and materially, and in terms of real or perceived injustices. This can lead to estrangement and divorce, and often develops into a bitter dispute about property, and more tragically, about children. The words of the merciful Christ, who fully understands the human heart, remain forever. What therefore God has joined together, let no man put asunder.
Other prayers followed, the Creed and prayers of the faithful, voicing the collective intentions of those gathered, spoken in various languages.
That the Lord's faithful word will sustain our Holy Father, Pope John Paul.
Que la présence du Seigneur
nos unan en la nueva alianza.
Shitokakat, Holo Belia, đến hưởng hồng ân tha thứ và được chữa lành mạnh.
We pray to the Lord.
But the focal point of the Mass is the Eucharist. During the preparation of the gifts and in true New Orleans style, clarinetist Pete Fountain and trumpeter Al Hurt provided the musical backdrop. The sacrificial gifts of bread and wine, humble substances which will become the body and blood of Jesus Christ.
Pray, my brothers and sisters, that our sacrifice may be acceptable to God, the Almighty Father.
On the night before he died at the Last Supper, Jesus himself instructed the apostles in the way in which his death was to be remembered.
While they were at supper, he took bread and gave you thanks and praise. He broke the bread, gave it to his disciples, and said, "Take this, all of you, and eat it. This is my body, which will be given up for you."
During the recitation of the Lord's Prayer, Eucharistic ministers began making their way into the crowd in preparation for giving Holy Communion. The Holy Father then offered peace to all the assembly.
The peace of the Lord be with you always, and also with you.
Let us offer to each other a sign of peace.
In a moving display, the crowd exchanged a sign or kiss of peace. The Holy Father gave communion to those on the altar and 100 other recipients representing various cross-sections from the state. From 1,800 communion stations, 500 priests and 150 permanent deacons distributed communion to the crowd. Communion over, the Mass drew to a close, with the Holy Father reciting the communion prayer and the blessing.
May Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Elements of the Mass have been added and changed since Jesus first blessed bread and wine at the Last Supper. The core of the Mass still lies in Christ's presence in the sacrament and Scripture, the message to the apostles from Christ himself almost 2,000 years ago. Do this in memory of me. John Paul then went directly to Xavier University for yet another meeting, this time with leaders from Catholic colleges and universities. The event, again sponsored by the National Catholic Educational Association, began with a ceremonial procession. Leading the way were university presidents in full academic attire, representing Catholic higher education in the United States today. Later, area students carrying banners depicting colleges and universities from around the world followed. These schools, among them Bologna, Heidelberg, Constantinople, and Oxford, date back as far as the 11th century. Although many today are secular, they all owe their beginnings to the Catholic Church, where medieval monks first established the study of academia. After welcoming remarks by NCEA officials, the conference heard from Dr. Norman Francis, president of Xavier University. Founded in 1915 by Mother Catherine Drexel, Xavier is the only black Catholic university in the United States.
In 1915, more than a century after the signing of the U.S. Constitution, she made possible Catholic higher education for blacks by founding Xavier University, the capstone of her educational network. Her desire to promote the development of capable black leadership with high moral and professional standards has been realized in the thousands of alumni who enrich religious life, teaching profession, business, medicine, science, law, the arts, and public service in this country and abroad.
A videotape presentation highlighted the history and diversity of Catholic higher education. Currently, there are 232 Catholic colleges and universities in America, the largest grouping in the world, with nearly 600,000 students.
Hello, I'm Bryant Gumbel. Welcome to the world of Catholic higher education in America. Now, during the next few minutes, we're going to introduce you to a variety of people who are engaged in a very special contribution to American life.
John Paul addressed the gathering. As a light rain fell, the Pope spoke of the importance of Catholic educators in their task of training young men and women to serve their communities and the world.
It is your privilege to serve your students in faith and love, to help them deepen their friendship with Christ, to make available to them the opportunities for prayer and liturgical celebration, including the possibility to know the forgiveness and love of Jesus Christ in the sacraments of penance and the Eucharist. You are able, as Catholic educators, to introduce your students to a powerful experience of community and a very serious involvement in social concerns that will enlarge their horizons, challenge their lifestyles, and offer them authentic human fulfillment.
Later, the Holy Father departed, returning by Popemobile to the Archbishop's residence for his final appearance in New Orleans. 3,000 invited guests gathered on the lawn of the Notre Dame Seminary for one last glimpse of the Holy Father. After circling the area, John Paul bestowed a final blessing on the crowd. The Pope's departure Sunday morning was a quick and quiet one as he limousined to the airport. Before boarding the TWA jet Shepherd 1, John Paul paused and thanked his security personnel and bestowed on each of them a personal gift. His next stop was San Antonio, where he continued his pastoral visit to the United States. John Paul's visit to our city can best be understood by dividing it into two categories, the event and the man. As an event, the papal visit is not unlike the city hosting the Super Bowl or a national convention. The city anticipates a substantial impact on the economy, not to mention the national recognition for New Orleans, a city which has had its share of bad news lately. It is more difficult, however, to place a value on the visit by the man, John Paul II. Thousands of New Orleanians were drawn by his warmth and charm. They flocked to all parts of the city, stood in lines, braved the heat to see and hear this charismatic leader. For many Catholics, his call to service renewed their commitment to their faith, giving them a new sense of pride and involvement in their church. For all of us, the impact of this man on the world is immeasurable. He represents a religion that dates back almost 2,000 years with complex hierarchy, ritual, and dogma. Yet his appeal lies in his own simplicity. One man with a simple message, and that is peace, morality, commitment, and service. For WLAE, I'm Charles Ziwi. Thank you for watching, and good night.